Can I say one thing?
Please.
To me, the great Stanley Kubrick
Yeah.
was an actor's enemy.
Well, he did 100 takes.
He was
per
an
shot.
actor's enemy. And I can point to movies that he's done, the worst performances I've ever seen in movies.
Robert Duvall is one of the most respected actors in Hollywood history. With a career spanning more than 6 decades, he has delivered some of the most powerful and memorable performances ever put on film. But beyond his work on screen, Duvall has always been known for something else too, his brutal honesty. Unlike many actors who carefully guard their words in public, Duvall has never been afraid to say exactly what he thinks, even when those thoughts are directed at some of the biggest names in the industry. He has criticized legends, turned down major film roles simply to avoid certain people, and made comments that left entire rooms stunned. This is the story of the 6 people Robert Duvall reportedly clashed with the most, and the real reasons behind those conflicts. If you find this kind of honest, behind-the-scenes look at Hollywood interesting, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video like this one. Now let's get into it. The first, and perhaps most famous name on this list is Marlon Brando. In 2022, when Hollywood was celebrating the 50th anniversary of The Godfather, Duvall used the occasion to speak very openly about his legendary co-star. Most people who worked alongside Brando kept their opinions polite, at least in public. Duvall was different. He described Brando as, in his own words, an actor's enemy. That is a remarkable thing to say about a man widely considered one of the greatest performers who ever lived. But Duvall was not speaking out of jealousy or bitterness. He was speaking from a place of deep professional disagreement. The tension between the two men began on the set of The Godfather, where Duvall played Tom Hagen, the quiet and loyal adopted son of Don Vito Corleone. Some of the most iconic scenes in film history were shot with the two men sharing the screen. But while the cameras captured something unforgettable, what was happening behind the scenes was far less inspiring, at least from Duvall's perspective. He watched Brando behave in ways that he felt were harmful to the other actors around him. According to Duvall, Brando had a habit of subtly humiliating younger or less established performers, weakening their confidence, and even disrupting scenes when the focus shifted away from himself. To Duvall, this was not the behavior of a great artist. It was the behavior of someone driven by ego, and ego, in his view, was poison to the collaborative spirit that good filmmaking requires. There was also a very specific and practical issue that bothered Duvall enormously. Brando was famous for refusing to memorize his lines. Instead, he relied on cue cards placed just off camera. He would sometimes ask crew members to write lines on boards for him to read. On other occasions, he reportedly asked fellow actors to tape lines to their own bodies so he could read them during a scene while appearing to look naturally at the other person. Duvall found this not only unprofessional, but genuinely disrespectful to the craft. In a 2022 interview, he plainly said that while Brando claimed this technique helped him stay spontaneous, part of it was simply laziness. Duvall even admitted that he tried the cue card method briefly himself out of curiosity, but quickly abandoned it. His conclusion was firm. If you know your lines completely, you can still be totally spontaneous. Real preparation does not kill spontaneity. It creates the conditions for it to happen naturally. Brando never publicly responded to these criticisms. By the time Duvall's most pointed comments became widely known, Brando had already passed away in 2004, so the conversation was in some ways one-sided. But Duvall made clear that his criticism was never personal hatred. It was about a fundamental disagreement over what acting actually is and how it should be approached. For Duvall, the craft demands full commitment, and cutting corners, no matter how famous you are, is simply not acceptable. The second person who drew Duvall's sharp criticism was not an actor at all, but one of the most celebrated directors in cinema history, Stanley Kubrick. In a Hollywood Reporter Awards roundtable in 2010, Duvall sat among a group of well-known actors and, without being provoked, called Kubrick an actor's enemy. The comment surprised the whole table.
Ryan Gosling was sitting nearby and reacted with visible amusement, but Duvall was completely serious. He went on to reference two of Kubrick's most famous films, The Shining and A Clockwork Orange, and said bluntly that while they might be great movies from a visual and storytelling standpoint, they contained some of the worst performances he had ever seen on screen.
The core of Duvall's problem with Kubrick was the director's notorious practice of demanding enormous numbers of takes for a single scene. Kubrick was known to sometimes shoot the same moment 50, 70, or even over 100 times. To many people, this looked like artistic perfectionism, a sign of how deeply Kubrick cared about getting things right. But to Duvall, it looked like something else entirely. He questioned what logical basis Kubrick could possibly have for knowing the difference between take 1 and take 70. More importantly, Duvall believed that repeating a scene that many times did not make a performance better, it made it worse. Each repetition drains the actor a little more. The emotional truth that should be present in a scene gets replaced, over time, by exhaustion and mechanical habit. The genuine spontaneity that makes a moment feel real and alive is the first thing to disappear when an actor is asked to do the same thing 70 times in a row. For Duvall, a truly talented director should come to set knowing exactly what they want. They should be able to guide the actor toward the right performance efficiently and with respect. Grinding someone through dozens of repetitions might produce the shot the director had in mind, but it does so at the expense of the actor's truth. And for Duvall, that truth is the entire point of the exercise. The third conflict on this list involves director Henry Hathaway, who helmed the 1969 Western True Grit. When Duvall joined the cast of that film at the age of 38, he was already developing a reputation as one of the most serious and method-driven actors of his generation. Hathaway, however, came from a completely different Hollywood tradition. He had been making films since the 1930s and believed in firm, top-down authority on a film set. He was the boss, and everyone, including the actors, was expected to do exactly what they were told, in exactly the way they were told to do it. There was very little room for interpretation, organic discovery, or the kind of internal emotional work that Duvall had built his entire approach on. The friction between them was almost immediate and never really went away. What Hathaway saw as discipline and professionalism, Duvall experienced as suffocating control. One specific incident has been remembered for years as capturing the full essence of their conflict. During filming, Hathaway reportedly snapped at Duvall with the command, "When I say action, tense up, goddamn you." For an actor whose whole philosophy was built on listening, reacting honestly, and letting performance emerge naturally from the moment, that kind of rigid, mechanical instruction was unbearable. It reduced acting to something closer to puppetry. Duvall was not a puppet. Years later, when asked about Henry Hathaway, Duvall's tone became noticeably colder than usual. He admitted plainly that they had not gotten along. When Hathaway's name came up specifically, his response was even more telling: "We won't talk about him." That kind of deliberate silence says more than almost any direct criticism could. The experience clearly left a deep mark, not because it broke Duvall in any way, but because it stood as a perfect example of everything he believed acting should never become. The fourth name on the list is Australian director Bruce Beresford, who directed Duvall in the 1983 drama Tender Mercies. There is a certain irony in this entry, because Tender Mercies was the film that won Robert Duvall the Academy Award for Best Actor, the only Oscar of his career. By any external measure, the collaboration was a triumph, but behind the scenes, the creative process was far from comfortable. Beresford brought a very controlled and precise approach to the film. Every moment, every line, every gesture was carefully considered and placed within specific limits. For many actors and directors, this kind of precision is simply called good direction, but for Duvall, it felt like being boxed in. He kept running up against invisible walls that prevented him from exploring the role as freely as he needed to. Unlike his conflict with Hathaway, which had been openly heated, the tension with Beresford was quieter. It was a slow, grinding kind of frustration rather than a blow-up.
But it was exhausting in its own way, the constant feeling of being pulled back just as he was trying to move forward. Duvall later described the experience as constantly pushing against constraints while trying to find the authentic core of the character. He managed to find it, clearly. The Oscar proved that. But the memory of that creative struggle stayed with him. Even the highest recognition the film industry can offer was not enough to erase the feeling that the collaboration had been harder than it needed to be. The fourth name on the list is director David Fincher, one of the most technically meticulous filmmakers working in Hollywood today. Fincher is known for his dark visual style, his obsessive attention to detail, and his practice of shooting an extraordinary number of takes. Stories from his sets talk about actors doing the same scene 40, 50, 60, sometimes 70 times or more. Many of the actors who have worked with Fincher describe the experience as exhausting, but ultimately worth it, because the results speak for themselves in the finished film. Duvall was not convinced. When Fincher's reputation came up, Duvall's reaction was sharp and brief. "That's not directing," he said. "That's torture." For Duvall, the endless repetition that Fincher required did not uncover deeper truth in a performance, it polished the life right out of it. The more times you repeat something, the more it becomes a mechanical imitation of itself, rather than a living, breathing moment. In the mid-1990s, Duvall was reportedly offered a role in Fincher's now legendary thriller Seven. Officially, the explanation was a scheduling conflict, but years later, in one of his more candid moments, Duvall admitted the real reason. He simply could not imagine repeating the same line 60 times. That admission says everything about where the two men stood in relation to each other artistically. Fincher believed perfection could be found through relentless repetition and total technical control. Duvall believed that the soul of a performance exists only in the early, unpolished, genuinely felt moments, and that no amount of repetition can create what was never there to begin with. The two men never had a direct confrontation, but the philosophical gap between them was enormous.
The sixth and final person on this list is a fellow actor, and in many ways Duvall's most interesting contrast, Robert De Niro. The two men share a remarkable amount of cinematic history. Both appeared in the Godfather films, with De Niro winning an Oscar for playing the young Vito Corleone in Part 2, the same role that Brando had made iconic in the original. Both men are considered among the finest actors of their generation. And yet, when Duvall spoke about De Niro, the warmth that you might expect was noticeably absent. Duvall was never openly hostile toward De Niro. His comments were always measured and, on the surface, respectful. At one point, he said simply that De Niro was very good at playing Italians. It sounds like a compliment, but coming from Duvall, who rarely wasted words, the narrowness of that praise was telling. He was essentially saying that De Niro excelled within a specific range, without suggesting that his talent was broader or deeper than that. The real source of the distance between them was not personal animosity, it was philosophy. De Niro became famous largely through a style of performance built on radical physical and psychological transformation. He famously gained significant weight to play the older Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull. He spent extensive time in real environments to prepare for roles, learning to play the saxophone for New York, New York, driving a taxi for months before Taxi Driver. He adopted accents, changed his body, reshaped his presence from role to role. Audiences and critics celebrated these extremes, and many considered them the highest expression of the actor's craft. Duvall remained skeptical. To him, acting was not about how much you could change yourself on the outside. It was about how honestly you could reveal something true on the inside. The real work of acting, he once said, is not in weight gain or costumes, it is in the silence. That single sentence captures the fundamental divide between his approach and De Niro's. For Duvall, the most powerful moments in performance are the quiet ones, where the camera catches something genuine in a person's eyes or stillness, not the dramatic external transformations that audiences tend to notice and applaud most visibly. De Niro, for his part, has always been respectful about Duvall when asked. He acknowledged him as a serious actor and described their difference as a matter of different energies.
The two men never fought publicly or clashed on set. Their rivalry, if it can even be called that, existed entirely in the realm of artistic philosophy. But that philosophical gap was real, and people inside the industry noticed it clearly over the years. Looking at all 6 of these conflicts together, a very clear picture emerges. Robert Duvall's clashes were never really about personal animosity or Hollywood ego. They were always about the same underlying set of beliefs. He believed that acting requires complete preparation. He believed that genuine spontaneity can only emerge from a foundation of thorough knowledge and discipline. He believed that a director's job is to guide and enable, not to control or exhaust. And he believed that the truth of a performance lives in restraint and honesty, not in physical transformation or theatrical spectacle. Whether Robert Duvall was right is a question the film world has been quietly debating for decades. The movies of Stanley Kubrick are still considered among the greatest ever made. The performances of Marlon Brando and Robert De Niro are still celebrated around the world. David Fincher's films continue to be critically acclaimed. And yet, the performances of Robert Duvall himself, in The Godfather, in Apocalypse Now, in Tender Mercies, in The Apostle, carry a specific kind of quiet power that is almost impossible to fake. There is something in them that feels completely real, never forced, never performed for the crowd. Whether that quality came from his philosophy or simply from his particular talent as a human being is hard to say, but it is there, and it is unmistakable. What is certain is that Duvall defended his principles throughout his career without apology and without compromise. In an industry where image management is almost universal, that kind of honesty is rare. Some found it refreshing, some found it difficult, but no one who watched him work, either on screen or off, could ever accuse him of being anything less than completely genuine.